Good morning, viewers. Today I am present before you with the work of Alexander Pope, The Rape of the Lock. In today's podcast, I will be talking about how The Rape of the Lock is a faithful picture of the 18th century life. Before I begin the podcast, it is advisable that you use earplugs for listening to the podcast. It is also requested that you keep a notebook and a pen so that you can jot down the important points relating to this particular topic. So here I begin. Alexander Pope has presented a true and faithful picture of the 18th century life in its manifold aspects in The Rape of the Lock. It is a real source of his strength. In no other poet do we find such a forceful and true reflection of the life of his age as in Pope. Leslie Stephen observes, I quote, Pope or his title to the name has been disputed. He had a power or weakness in which he has scarcely been rivaled. No writer reflected so clearly and completely the spirit of his own day. Unquote. Comparing Pope with Shakespeare, Lowell writes, I quote again, Truly, as Shakespeare is the poet of man as God made him, dealing with great passion and innate motives, so truly is Pope the poet of society, the delineator of manners, the exposer for those motives which may be called acquired, whose spring is in habits and institutions of purely worldly origin. Unquote. Life in the 18th century was artificial. It was the age of clubs and coffee houses. People cared more for outward glamour than for inherent virtues. Corruption pervaded the society. The spirit of self-sacrifice, which is the salt of a nation's life, was extinct among public men in the age of Pope. The fashionable society or the aristocratic class was completely devoid of sincerity. The tone of gallantry which men showed while addressing ladies was in fact a mockery of chivalry. Similarly, it appeared from the behavior and ways of ladies that their main aim was to attract and ensnare men. From the picture of women presented by him, Pope is apt to infer that women are all frivolous beings whose one genuine interest is in love-making. The fashionable ladies like Belinda used to get up very late in the day. They awoke from the dreams of love in an atmosphere of perfume. They were wonderfully fond of lapdogs. The toilet was a sacred task. Jewels, cosmetics, powders, rows of pins, perfumery and paints were magnificently displayed on the toilet table. They spent considerable time in toilet, armed with all the charms. They appeared in society and drove in gilt coaches or in sedan chairs. They often visited beautiful and majestic places in the company of fashionable young men to break the monotony of theatres and balls. They were also fond of gambling and playing cards. They spent all their time in lovemaking and coquetry. According to Dr. Johnson, their minds were as unfixed as their eyes, which shone on all alike. Their hearts were moving toy shops. Elvin observes, the world of fashion is displayed in its more gorgeous and attractive lines, and everywhere the emptiness is visible beneath the outward splendor. The beauty of Belinda, the details of her toilet, her troops of admirers are all set forth with unrivaled grace and fascination, and all bear the impress of vanity and vexation. Nothing can exceed the art with which the satire is blended with pomp, mocking without disturbing the insubstantial gewgaw. The double vein is kept up with sustained skill in the picture of the outward charms and the inward frivolity. With varying vanities from every part, they shift the moving toy shop of their heart, are the lines from Rape of the Lock. The young gallants of Pope's time were also much interested in the frivolous and fashionable life. The spirit of chivalry was dead. The baron rudely snip off a lock of hair of Belinda, while as honourable man will resort to some other fair and dignified way. The odd number of his former trophies of love suggests that perhaps they too were stolen like Belinda's lock. The young men were very punctilious about dress. They were fops tailor-made men without any brains or higher ideals. They prided on their snuff boxes and malacca canes and were fond of drinking and gambling. They indulged themselves in amorous intrigues and idle frivolities. The vanity and shallowness of the artificial life of his day and its mannerisms are faithfully presented in Pope's The Rape of the Lock. He has exposed the foibles and frivolities of the 18th century society. He comes before us as the representative of his age, and the poem may well be called an expression of the artificial life of the day, of its card parties, toilets, lapdogs, street drinking, snuff taking, and idle vanities. According to an eminent American critic, I quote, "In The Rape of the Lock, Pope has caught and fixed forever the atmosphere of the age. No great English poem is at once so brilliant and so empty, so artistic and yet so void of the ideal on which all high art rests." Unquote. The fortunes and reputation of Pope, says Lecky, form as curious and important a page in English literary history as the fortunes of Aristotle in the history of European thought. No poet was ever more clearly the outcome and the representative of the tendencies of his time. His path had been prepared by the French taste which came of England at the Restoration, turning the minds of men from the higher and wilder forms of imagination, producing a contempt for everything that was archaic, unsymmetrical, and inartistic, and making measure and refinement and exact and highly polished art the supreme ideals of taste. Pope had ever so perfectly realized the poetic ideal of his educated contemporaries, and for the long space of 3/4 of a century, so absolutely formed, fixed, and satisfied their standard of taste. Pope's poetry indeed bears to the poetry of the 17th century much the same relation as a Greek temple to a Gothic cathedral, and the poet of his genius are very evident. He was essentially the poet of a town, the poet of a cultivated and artificial society. The crystalline perfection of his diction has indeed in its own form never been suppressed. No instrument has ever been framed more admirably adapted to express vividly and accurately noble thoughts, to point by epigram the shaft of wit, or to impress itself indelibly on the memories of men. The fashion of literature has changed, but many modern readers, fatigued with obscurity and affection, and paradox and exaggeration, will gladly turn to a poet who never wrote a careless or an unmeaning line, who embodied in transparent words so many noble thoughts and images and characters, and whose language, if it has not the remembrance-like depth of colouring of some of his successors, has at least all the severe and polished beauty of Greek sculpture. But the charm of his versification is more the charm of supremely perfect rhetoric than of music, and like the century he represented, poetic sensibility and imagination are in his poetry unduly subordinated to the reasoning power. Hence, The Rape of the Lock absolutely represents the faithful picture of the 18th century life. I hope the podcast on The Rape of the Lock proved to be of help to each one of you. Please mention your questions and observations in the comment section below. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell icon for latest update. Thank you for your valuable time. Here's wishing you a great day ahead.